Cornier from Public Impact. We are going to be co-presenting a session on turnaround leader competencies for recruitment, selection, and development of turnaround leaders. Just want to let everyone know that this session is being recorded and that there will be places along the way where we will ask you to ask questions. Use your chat box over to the right of your screen to type in your questions. We want to be sure to be able to have a discussion around that. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So there we go. So to get started for today, we have a polling question to get us going. And we want you to respond to one of three choices. You want to learn more about turnaround leader competencies, and that's why you signed up for the webinar. Or you signed up because you need resources to select and develop leaders, or you're providing TA on effective leadership strategies with a set of clients or states, and that's why you signed up for today. So we're going to give you about a minute here to make a choice. Click the button, and then we'll see how you responded to that. So while we're waiting for everyone to make a response, and we have some fabulous IT support behind the scenes here, Jessica will let us know how everyone responded. We're going to go ahead. Oh, there it is. So most of everybody that's joining today is providing technical assistance and wants to learn more about effective leadership strategies. So that's great to know. All right, thank you, Jessica. There we go. Lag there. Okay, so the outcomes for the webinar today are based really around these 4 bullet points that you see here. We're most interested today in learning how we can support you in using this fabulous set of resources. So these resources were developed in a partnership with the Center for School Turnaround, Public Impact, University of Virginia Darden Curry Partnership for Educational Leaders, and the Center for Great Teachers and Leaders. So 4 awesome partners came together, put their best thinking on the table, and designed these materials. And we really want to be able to get them implemented out in the field. So as we walk through these materials today, we want you to be thinking around these 4 different ways that we could support you in using this resource. So we can help you conduct training of trainers. We can co-present with the RCC or SEA staff to help build the capacity of state and district leaders, and we've done that on many occasions using other materials that we have. We can provide support to the SEA to figure out how to customize this professional learning module because it has a lot of flexibility in it, and we designed it purposely to be able to be adapted to different kinds of contexts. Or to be able to provide support to identify how additional resources that are inside this professional learning module could be used to further support your work with SEAs. So we're going to come back to this at the end of this session, but we wanted you to start to frame your thinking around those 4 ways that we could provide support to you. Okay. My slide's not wanting to move here. There we go. Oh, okay. So outcomes for today are we want everyone to leave today understanding turnaround leader competencies and the connection to leader selection and development strategies. And also to remind everyone on the call today that we're talking about a certain kind of leader that is needed to make a turnaround happen at our lowest performing and oftentimes most challenging schools. We also hope everyone walks away having learned about the Turnaround Leader Competencies Professional Learning Module. We're going to dig more into that here in just a minute. What's inside of it and all the different kinds of activities that you can use or modify or adapt. And then, as I said before, determine how GTL can help support the use of these materials in your work. So, with that being said, I'm going to stop here for just a minute and check in with Jessica to see if we have any questions in our chat box.
Nope, we haven't received any yet.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to introduce you to the Turnaround Competencies Professional Learning Module, and we're going to start that with a polling question. So what we're interested in finding out is if this is the first time you've seen this material, do you have a basic working knowledge of what Turnaround Leader Competencies are? Or did you participate in the Center for School Turnaround Fall Conference in 2015 where Jeanette and myself and Dallas Hitt did a high-level overview of all these materials? So just take a minute here. If you just click a button real quickly. And while you're clicking the button, I'm going to multitask here and continue on with this session. All of our professional learning modules that you can find on the Center's website under professional learning module, and we have lots of different topics. This one is on turnaround leaders. They're all designed in a similar fashion. Each set of materials comes with a fully developed facilitator's guide that actually has talking notes on the side next to the corresponding slide. So you can just put up the slide deck and use the facilitator's guide and talk your way through a professional learning module. Lots of great resources are contained in there. So you have a facilitator's guide. You have a complete slide deck, and then any and all accompanying handouts and documents to conduct that training session are all included. You can download them. It's a free resource, which means that you can modify them to fit your needs. You can put your state's logo on it or the district's logo on it, but they're there to be used in that kind of way. And it's an absolutely fabulous, great set of resources. So, awesome, Jeanette. 53% of our folks have basic knowledge of turnaround leader competency. That's great. That's fabulous. Okay. We will also send this slide deck out to you after we finish today, so you can have this to use as a reference too as well. This just gives you a picture of what the professional learning modules look like. When we sat down and all the partners came together and we thought about turnaround leader competencies and what were the current needs of the field at the time, we came up with identifying these three particular areas, and in each part has its own set of materials. So part one is understanding turnaround leader competencies, building a working knowledge and a common understanding of a competency. Part two is addressing recruiting and selecting turnaround leaders. We've heard a lot of need for that, and we've also seen district practices need to adjust in order to be able to find that particular type of leader. And then part three is focused on developing and supporting turnaround leaders. Each training session is designed to be delivered in about 90 to 120 minutes. However, you could expand on that or you could condense that depending upon what your needs are. We also included a link down here, so you can click on the link and go to all the materials right there at your fingertips. The one thing that we've been saying as we've been going around and talking about these materials is most people want to jump right into developing and supporting turnaround leaders. And what we've been saying is it's a good practice to start at part one just to make sure that everybody on your team, whether it's the SEA level or the district level, has a common understanding of what the turnaround competencies are and a common interpretation of them. That's the base, that's the foundation. And then you can move into either of the other modules around recruiting and selecting or developing and supporting. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jeanette, and Jeanette is going to walk you through part one of our learning module on understanding turnaround leader competencies. Is Jeanette there? Or Jeanette, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. And I think I have control of the PowerPoint now. As Catherine mentioned, we are going to do a very brief overview of each of the 3 parts of this professional learning module. And at the end of each section, each part, we're going to take a look at the questions that you have been adding into the chat box. So if you'll go ahead and add your questions into the chat box as we're going through, then at the end of part 1, we'll pause and we'll answer some questions. And also, if you will be thinking about ways that you might use part 1 resources, at the end of the 3 parts, we want to have a discussion about what are some ways that the center, the Great Teachers and Leaders Center can support you as you go forward and use these materials to provide technical assistance. Oh, there it goes. Too fast. Okay. So part 1 outcomes are to acknowledge the unique challenges of leading school turnaround and contrast that with the challenges of leading in other school settings. To identify those leader competencies and actions that have been associated with turnaround success. To understand the importance of competencies in turnaround leader selection and development, which are parts 2 and 3, and to analyze the school leader behaviors. So we have some application activities where you can analyze leader behaviors to identify evidence of those competencies. So you get a little taste of that in part 1. The big idea here is that strong leadership is essential to turnaround success, and that using turnaround leader competencies to recruit, select, and support turnaround leaders can increase the number of effective turnaround leaders and the number of schools that are successful. Oops. Okay, and then competencies are the underlying patterns of thinking, feeling, acting, and speaking that cause a person to be successful in a specific role or a specific task. And so we're looking not just at the outward actions and behaviors, but the underlying competencies. The great news is that we can use different methodologies to probe for information that will let us know the competencies of folks coming in and target areas for development. Competency research suggests that outstanding performance in complex jobs, ones in which most candidates have a similar educational history and significant autonomy over daily work tasks, like in school leadership, is driven more by the underlying competencies than by readily observed skills and knowledge. And so sometimes when we're looking at what is on paper on someone's CV, we may not get a clear picture of who's the best fit in a challenging job like school turnaround. You were sent an attachment that is also one of the handouts in part 1 that has a list of turnaround leader competencies that comes from a body of research done by Public Impact and also by the University of Virginia Partnership for Leaders in Education. And we are continuing to do research to try to fine-tune and hone in on what are those competencies that best predict and are most associated with successful turnaround leadership. And so they're here bucketed under driving for results, influencing for results, problem solving and personal effectiveness, and you have a handout that gives you a little more information about those competencies. Whoops. Sorry, everybody. Okay, the talent development framework. We wanted to make sure that people understood that when you're looking at the turnaround leader competencies and using those to attract, prepare, develop, support, and retain effective leaders for turnaround schools, that it sits in a broader context. And so this is the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders Talent Development Framework that talks about the bigger picture around the talent development systems that are in place. And so in this module, we ask people to think about, within their existing systems, how do they use the turnaround competencies, and where would they overlay those competencies to be more effective in their selection, recruitment, and support of turnaround leaders. We have, in each of the parts of the module, we have some interactive activities which could actually, you could use for a longer work session, but again, in the 90 to 120 minute sessions, we're looking at just giving a sampling so that people are really interacting. In this part one, we want them interacting with the turnaround leader competencies to really understand what are the unique challenges of leaders in turnaround settings, and what kinds of competencies will they need to be effective in those settings. We have a article which was also sent to all of you as an attachment, The Big U-Turn, and it was about the research that Public Impact conducted on turnaround leader actions. What were the actions and the underlying competencies of leaders in successful turnarounds across sectors? And so that gives you a little framing for where those competencies originally originated from. And then we have a case study example where we ask participants to take a case study, one-page case study of a turnaround leader that's based on several turnaround leaders that we have worked with in the past. So these are actual things that have happened. Ask them to take the list of turnaround leader competencies and score that case study example. So go through and say, I see evidence of these competencies in this action or this part of the case study, or I see evidence of a lack of that competency. And then there's a rich interactive activity where folks can get into some conversation about what are the struggles that the turnaround leaders are facing, and then that sets the stage for saying, how do we recruit people with the right competencies, and how do we develop those competencies that might be weaker in people who are in the situation of leading turnaround efforts. Okay, so what questions do you have about part one? You can use the chat box, and I think Jessica's going to read the questions that we have.
I don't see any in just yet, but we can give folks a minute or two.
Okay, and while we're doing that, Jessica, I think we'll keep moving along, and you can just let us know if some questions pop in. So if you would pass the baton to me, please. Okay, while she's doing that, I'll give you an overview.
Catherine, sorry.
Yes.
We do have a question, if you guys want to take it now.
Sure.
From Karen Kearney, we have, what is the relationship between the new National Administrator Standards and these competencies?
I'm glad you asked.
Good one. Yes.
We are actually in the process of doing an analysis of the relationship between the two, and so that'll be a resource that we will put out from the GTL Center as well.
Yeah, and that will probably be early summer. You'll see something like that. But yes, we are in the process of doing it right now. Any other questions? Okay. So
nope.
Jessica, slides aren't moving, so I'm just going to go ahead and go on. I'm going to give you the overview of part 2, which is focused on recruiting and selecting turnaround leaders. There we go. And we felt like this was an area that really needed attention. The research is pretty clear that districts are not doing a very good job of recruiting and hiring turnaround leaders, and that oftentimes really good people are put into situations that they don't have the competencies developed to be in. So for this particular module, we focus on understanding the importance of competencies in recruiting, so going after the person that you need and not assuming that everyone is a good fit. Exploring ways to recruit leaders, which we took a sampling of different job descriptions that districts put out, and then we have people go through and look at it to analyze if you're marketing for what you want. And then actually taking people through a competency-based interview, which is different than some of the typical principal interviews you may have been a part of or had been experienced as a potential principal, where they ask you questions. This really probes at the competencies, and then there's a rating system to determine how you rate on each competency to use in your selection process. So I don't think the slides, they don't like me. Gosh. So one of the things that we think about and talk with districts when we get into this section is this point that Jeanette made earlier. And this graphic really clearly displays that in most typical hiring processes, we don't go beneath the iceberg. We only look at the top part, which is your certification, your degrees, your knowledge, and your skills. And when we think about competencies, as Jeanette said, you can have two people in the same job, and all of those things are the same. Why does one person outperform the other? It's because they demonstrate competencies for that particular role, and that's what's down below the iceberg. We introduce in this section here a behavioral event interview process, and it was developed by Public Impact. It's a process that district teams can go through with the potential candidate and really digging at and getting information on the competencies that a successful turnaround leader would need to demonstrate. Remember that the competencies are key predictors of how someone will perform. Past behavior predicts future behavior. So we really engage districts in a conversation around assessing their current hiring practices and then thinking about how you could modify or adjust your hiring practice to include this behavioral event interview process so that we can do a better job of getting a match that is more highly successful, of being successful. Key activities in this section are assessing hiring practices. We developed a hiring scorecard, and we've gotten really good feedback on that tool. People like that tool. We analyze the district turnaround job postings, and most people realize that they're really not advertising for the kind of person that they want. We role play this interview process, which is kind of neat because people get to experience a typical interview process, and then what's it like if you add in probing for competencies. And then we have a closing activity around discussing matching principles and trying to make that best fit. So with that, that takes us down to asking if there's any questions about part 2, and if we continue to think about ways that you could use this in your work. So, Jessica, do we have any questions coming in?
Not yet. We did have one person mention that the BEI interview process is very helpful. So they just had a comment, not really a question. They found it was very powerful. That was Julie.
Great. Yes, we worked with one district where they interviewed 5 potential candidates using their traditional process, and then they went back and made a recommendation, and then they went back through and used the BEI and made a completely different recommendation to the superintendent for the principal. So I think it's really interesting. That was a big learning experience for them, and they realized that their old practices were contributing to their principal churn in their district. So we'll hand it back over to Jeanette, and she is going to walk you through part 3.
Thanks, Catherine. And we work with a fairly large urban district that has also done the same. They used their BEI, behavioral event interview process for selection of turnaround leaders, and decided that it was so valuable that they integrated it into the final selection of all school leaders, principals, and vice principals. So I definitely think there's some power there, and this might be some initial exposure in this module to the resources about how to use behavioral event interviews and how to select competencies that you're looking for in those leadership roles. So definitely a powerful tool. Okay, so part 3, developing and supporting turnaround leaders. Obviously, there's a lot that could be done here, and this is just a brief module, but it gets us started in the conversation. And we're really interested in your ideas, too, about what would be follow-up materials, right? So this is awareness level, this is introductory level, and if there are other tools that you keep hearing repeatedly that districts, states and districts are needing to support their turnaround leaders, we'd like to know that from you as well, because it could be a new set of tools and materials that the GTL Center could sponsor. So part 3 outcomes are to understand the district's role in developing and supporting turnaround leaders, to examine high-quality adult learning and the implications for competency-based development of turnaround principals, and to explore how districts can leverage principal supervisors and others to increase those competencies. And so based on some prior research from Public Impact, we work with participants to do a self-assessment of district support systems that are in place. And so what we have found in the research is that districts support turnaround by committing to the school's success and then staying very publicly in support of the changes, because change is difficult, and they need to be supporting the school from the top. Choosing the right types of intervention and turnaround strategies for the right schools. Developing a pipeline of turnaround leaders. This is a big push, it seems, with several state departments of education, and I know several large districts that have put a lot of energy into, we can't just wait until we have a need. We have to proactively find people who have these competencies, and we need to encourage them to take on turnaround leader roles and prepare them for those roles. Giving leaders the big yes, so the idea of there is a level of autonomy that is needed at the school level in order to make dramatic changes that result in significant gains in achievement at these schools. Holding leaders accountable for results and supporting them to meet those expectations. The district has a role in both support and accountability, and that there's a internal tension, and we do some talking about that, but also those two things go hand in hand. And so the district plays both of those roles. And then prioritizing teacher hiring in turnaround schools. And this can often be difficult because you're pulling the best teachers from across the district and trying to get them, or pulling the best teachers from the pool, the candidate pool, and trying to get them to work in your most struggling schools. And that has its own set of challenges. And then proactively engaging the community. So that we've seen that misstep at times where districts are moving forward with turnaround and change efforts without bringing the community into the conversation early enough, and that makes it just a more difficult conversation. So these are multiple things that the district can do to support turnaround, and in this module we do a self-assessment, and then we do some talking about what does that look like when it's working well. Support and accountability, again, these are two roles that are forever linked, and the district, we spend some time in this module talking about what are our definitions of accountability, our definitions of support, and how do those two roles function together within a district system. And you could say the same about a state system as well, right? That the state education agencies play the role of accountability and support to districts. And so I think there's no matter where you sit, you have a vested interest in that conversation. Then a big part of the developing of turnaround leader competencies falls on the shoulders of the principal supervisor. So we spend some time talking about what's the role of the principal supervisor, and how can they leverage that role to increase the effectiveness of their turnaround leaders. Whoops. Okay, hold on. Or do we have, let's see. Okay. The activities, as I mentioned, there's the self-assessment of district support. There's the activity where we really engage in a discussion about support versus accountability. There is a opportunity to reflect on the role of the principal supervisor and how we can better leverage that role to increase competencies. And then there's an application through a set of case studies where we look at how districts have created the conditions necessary for competency-based leader development for individuals and for all leaders across the district. And so we're back to what questions do you have about 3?
So it looks like we have a question from Julie Duffield. Is there also some focus on how turnaround leadership builds teacher leadership?
Jeanette, I can go ahead and answer that. So ask the question again, Jenny, please.
How does a focus on turnaround leadership build teacher leadership?
So when you go back and look at the graphic that displays the 4 different cluster areas for turnaround leaders, you see in the left-hand quadrant is driving for results, and then right next door is influencing others. It's in that influencing others competency, thank you, Jeanette, cluster area that is teacher leadership. And the research on the competencies has designated driving for results as a primary competency area, and secondary is influencing for results. So if principals don't score high in driving for results or influencing for results, their ability to be successful is minimal. So these are 2 main key areas that a turnaround leader really must demonstrate a high level of competency. Influencing for others, you unpack that particular area, really focuses on, you can see, developing others. And turnaround leaders who have been able to turn around to sustain the school recognize the role of teacher leadership in that long-term vision of sustainability. They also recognize the role of distributed leadership and being able to turn the school around and be able to sustain that too as well. And so oftentimes you'll see these leaders come in and build school leadership teams, instructional leadership teams, create a core steering group that will be monitoring the turnaround process and also be able to be influential with the other teachers and community members that are a part of making the turnaround happen too as well. So it's a key factor, and principals really need to be cognizant of that in their 3 to 5 year school improvement design process of where are we going to deliberately and intentionally pay attention to having a system for teacher leader opportunities. And Jeanette, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's key, is that it is a critical part of the turnaround leader competencies. So it comes up there in the development of teacher leaders and the engagement of teachers in the leadership of the school. I think one thing that your question raises for me is that as we went through this module, as I said, on developing turnaround leader competencies, we realized that there seems to be a great need in the field to say, okay, so if the competency that I want to develop in my turnaround leader is their ability to lead a team of teachers and to engage their teachers in leadership and to do that kind of work, then what are the specific development activities I can do to help support them in growing in that area? And obviously this 90 to 120 minute module didn't get us there, but we would love to hear more about what you think the greatest areas of need for additional development are.
Yep.
So we're going to go ahead and go forward. Do we have another question? But I'm going to move the slides forward.
Okay. Any other questions, Jessica or Jenny?
Not yet. Nope.
Okay, so I'm ready to facilitate that conversation. So I'm going to get it up here, and then if we can give it back to Catherine.
Yeah, and if you can just flip that one more down, Jeanette, that'd be great.
There we go.
Perfect. Yeah, so we're gonna do another polling question and try to get some feedback from you on how we could help support you in using this resource. So we'll have Jessica will post up here a polling question that you can respond to, and then we'd also like you to use the chat box so we can, as best as we can, generate some discussion around this. As I said earlier, it's a good set of resources. It's foundational in getting districts and SEAs to start to have conversations and thinking about turnaround leaders and thinking about it as a highly skilled, specialized type of leadership needed for turning around low-performing schools, and then thinking about, okay, if we acknowledge that, then how do we adjust our systems to help us be able to go out and recruit and hire and match principals. And then the most, I think the most critically important part is once we have them and we've matched them, then how do we best support and develop these folks? And we've seen all different kinds of versions of that happen, from designating you as a turnaround principal, putting you in the building and giving you the keys and coming back and checking on you at the end of the year with this tremendous autonomy. And then we've seen it where there was really very strict compliance. So you were designated as a turnaround leader. However, every decision came down from the district, and it was hard for the principals to be able to hire teachers into the building or to move teachers around in the building or make other kinds of adjustments. So that was a lot of the thinking that went in behind developing these materials, is to get the conversation started and to get SEAs and LEAs to start to really assess their systems and look at what kind of adjustments could they make in there. Jessica, do we have some information back?
So only a few people have answered the poll yet. So if folks haven't answered the poll, please do so.
Yeah. And also, if you would type in your questions too as well about how we could best support you. And actually, Jessica, could we unmute people so that we could have an actual conversation here?
You can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So Jessica's going to unmute everybody, and at that point, it'd be great if you would, if you have a question or you and you want to talk about how we can best support you, just say your name and where you're from, and then we can continue our discussion. So will you let us know when everybody's unmuted, please?
So, Catherine, maybe while we're waiting, there is one comment in the chat box. Sorry, I just lost the chat box. So from Glenda Copeland, she commented that there's demand at the SEA level to provide training for LEA principal supervisors.
Hi, this is Karen Kearney in California. I have a question about how this work can influence LEAs to support family involvement in the hiring process, and how we can educate families to engage in this.
That you would have other types of folks participate in the interview process, maybe community people or parents?
Yeah, and you know, in most cases, hiring principals, recruiting even principals or other site leaders is a local control situation.
Right.
And with all of our efforts to increase family and community involvement in meaningful decision making in the schools, it seems like these competencies and all of that ought to be able to propel us to include more families in the process. And I'm just wondering if you've made those connections yet.
If you go into part 2 and look at the principal hiring scorecard, you'll see that it is a self-directed assessment on best hiring practices for district, and there are some questions there around do you train people who are going to participate in the interview before the interview process? Do you conduct some type of inter-rater reliability as part of your training? So I think for parents to be involved in the interview process, that certainly could be appropriate. It may be that the district determines where's the best place for that part to happen. Maybe the district team conducts the behavioral event interview, and then there are performance questions that are asked, which is where you may bring in the parents so that they can get an overall picture of the possible candidate. So I would direct you to go look at that principal hiring scorecard and use that to try to figure out the next best step to include parents as part of this process. Okay.
I think the other thing that comes up for me is that even at the earliest outset, when you're saying we need to hire leaders and teacher leaders to work in these schools, is to get the parents and community stakeholders involved in the conversation about what are the competencies we're looking for and why. So even sharing some of that research on why these competencies are so critical for turnaround settings, and then engaging the community in that early part of what are we looking for, right? And then you have, of course, there'll probably be some parents on the selection committee who have some, some input into the process. And then we do have resources that talk about community and parent engagement in turnaround efforts in a broader sense, not just in leader selection. And those could be really great resources to use as you have that discussion. And those are things that departments could put out as guidance documents, right? Things that are helpful tools for districts to use. So that's something to note.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions someone wants to ask or that were posed in the chat box?
This is Karen again in California. I have a silly question, but I'm just wondering, in light of ESSA and ESSA language, are we assuming that the term turnaround is going to stick, or are we anticipating another terminology to be used?
That's a very interesting question, and there's been a lot of conversation around it, and I don't have an answer for you. And Jeanette, have you heard something, a determination yet on your end?
No, I haven't. I know that there are already some places that in the last couple of years have shifted away from the use of the term turnaround to transformation or other kinds of school change pieces. But I think that really the shift seems to be more in interpretation of what do we mean by that, as opposed to the term itself, right? So it's now states and districts that are needing to really examine what are they going to do for persistently low performing schools, and what are they going to call that, right?
Yeah, I think the waters got muddied when they made it be one of the models for
one of the interventions.
I'm sorry, guys. Jeanette, you want to go ahead and pick that up?
Dogs are barking. Okay, so I think we should go ahead and move into continuing this conversation. Do you want to pull the slides back up, or?
Okay, so I'm back. I'm sorry about that. It's been a really interesting day. So I'm back. I apologize for that. It's been a really interesting day here. So we'll close this out by saying that the last slide here, in which we'll send the slide deck out to you, has our contact information on it. And if you're interested in having a conversation around modifying the use of these materials for a situation that you have coming up or training, please contact us and we can help provide that assistance. If you want to set up a train-the-trainer type of session, we can do that, and we'll be happy to talk with you about that. If you want to talk about opportunities where we can collaborate together and then and do like a co-training to build the capacity. We can do this as well. We're doing that on a project in Arizona. We're going to conduct a training session jointly, and then after that, they're going to pick it up and do it on their own throughout the rest of the state. So we're here to help. We really want to get folks to start to use these resources in the way that best meets their needs. So you can contact either Jeanette or myself, and we'd be more than welcome a conversation with you. Last couple minutes of this, Jeanette, if you can put you on the spot here, if you would just talk a couple minutes about what we have in development now, just so that people can get a sense of what's going to be coming out this summer.
Sure, and again, we would love your follow-up input on additional resources that would be helpful to you. Public Impact and UVA are both engaged in some research around critical turnaround leader actions, and so we were going to make a link between the competencies and how do you support and develop and coach turnaround leaders so that they are taking those highest leverage actions that result in the best outcomes in dramatically improving performance in schools. And so we're starting a PLM that is focused, a professional learning module that is focused on the learning from that research on the turnaround leader actions and how you can coach and develop and support leaders in building those actions. So that's actually underway. We've started that work, and we are also interested in the kinds of support that Catherine mentioned. If you decide you want to use these first 3 professional learning modules and you have a group of states that you're going to be working with, or a state that wants you to come and do that training, and you don't feel comfortable first time out of the box doing it on your own, then we could send someone to co-train with you to deliver that training. We can customize those trainings for a specific state, so we could do some technical assistance like that. And that's all available to you through the GTL Center. So just want to encourage you to take advantage of that great resource and ask for technical assistance and support in using these tools.
All right, so just want to make sure we don't have any questions in the chat box. I'm going to check in one more time with Jessica and Jenny, make sure we're okay there.
No additional questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We'll send the slide deck out afterwards so you can have a copy of that, because that'll have the contact information to get directly to Jeanette or myself. And we look forward to hearing from you, and we also look forward to hearing from you when you use the materials. We really would like to collect stories of how different RCCs have used these materials and what the results have been. So we'd like to hear that feedback from you too as well. So thank you very much for spending the last hour with us, and we hope to hear from you soon.